Okay, I think we're live.
Hello, Masud, you interrupted me. Hello, welcome, sup, क्या चल रहा है, and और सुना जानी to our viewers. Welcome to On That Point. With me, we have the tallest debater Lums has ever produced, Imaad Hasan Jafri, the most Karachi-looking Islamabadi we could find, Ali Nawaz Khan, and the debate candy we will use to sell our future merchandise, Taha Kaihan Masud. Hydrated as always. So, what are we doing, guys? Essentially, is this like another podcast where we thought our thoughts are like important enough कि सबको सुननी चाहिए, like हम बहुत fit बातें करते हैं? Is this basically like a way to earn money now that like most of us are facing unemployment? Or like is there some actual purpose to this, guys? Like we'll start off with the guy whose idea this was, Masood. Like, what's up, man?
Yeah, sure, not gonna lie. Unemployment hit me recently, and I was trying to figure a way to turn my biggest talent into a source of income. Unfortunately, I failed. The coaches have cracked the code, and there's no way in apart from that. Um, फिर मैंने सोचा, I have a lot of wisdom to offer to the world, so maybe I should talk about it. Then I realized much smarter people than me have a bunch of debate content already. So it is none of these things, Ashar. This is a debate circuit gossip podcast. This is where we're going to talk about interesting things happening on the circuit, fun storylines, competitions. And obviously, part of the reason this is just happening is because if four guys become friends, there's nothing more natural or manly for them to do than start a podcast because everybody needs to hear what they're thinking.
So, Nawaz, like we already had an Islamabadi, we had like representation from Karachi. You essentially taken जो लाहौरी कोटा होना था यहाँ पे. Very non-DSP behavior of you. So like, why do you come on board, man? Like, what are you doing here?
I mean, I don't even know, man, to be honest with you. I genuinely don't know. At this stage, I guess since I'm the most freest out of all of us, like if there is a banner for unemployment and lost souls coming to debate, I guess I would be the embodiment of it. So I guess, and to be fair, man, like everybody's complaining about like Lahori overrepresentation. So if we're like taking that away in this podcast, it kind of shows how affirmative we are from the get go.
And like, none of us are from ISL, and none of us are women. So
None of
like,
us.
so
ISL
like,
didn't even exist when I was in school.
We're from the
like, are
only
we the
ISL
real?
that matters.
Imaad, like we know we had to bring you on board क्योंकि like we needed proper Karachi representation. Like we couldn't let two Islamabadis be in charge of all of the jokes. But like you're a sucker for nostalgia, right? Matlab WWE, you know, like reminiscent of debates. So like is that why you're here?
Yeah, I mean, not just being a sucker for nostalgia, but I mean, the moment Masood put forward the idea of doing a debate podcast, I opened up the extensive record that I have stored from each of the tournaments that I've spoken. And I thought, I mean, after having spoken and judged around 85, 88, 89 tournaments, um, anything debate related is something that, I can't help myself but be involved in. And of course, if it's an opportunity to go down memory lane and to test exactly how much I remember from every single debate that I've spoken, I mean, being able to flex those memory muscles is an opportunity I'm going to take advantage of.
I like how we're 85, 89 now क्योंकि 60 was when इमाद की मैंने first retirement speech सुनी थी at Shajivna, no matter how much इमाद contests कि वो retirement speech नहीं थी. But like this reminds me, right? क्योंकि essentially like when all of us were debating, you know, A levels में and then uni में, we saw like all of these old debaters still involved in the circuit, like and all of us were hating on them. Like I've been a part of a few dino jokes, like everyone has. And you know, obviously like you think उस वक्त के when we graduate like हम ऐसे नहीं होंगे, but essentially अब हम ऐसे ही हैं. तो like all of us just happen to somehow now come back into the debate circuit. Like it wasn't coordinated. Yes, like we're in similar circles, but like we all just came back alag se. And I remember like I think chief amongst like the celebrated returns is bar was circuit's favorite son returning, like Taha Masood. So Masood, like what brought you back? Like obviously joked about unemployment, but usse pehle se like you had started to come back. So like what started it all?
Yeah, sure. To be quite honest with you, it was a mistake, and now it's too late to turn it around. क्योंकि as you'll recall, पिछले साल मैंने तुम्हें promise कर दिया था कि I'll speak Shajivna with you at some point. So I was committed to speaking Shajivna this year no matter what. But I didn't see this as a glorious return to debate. I thought, okay, Ashar and I will come in, wipe up the competition, and then leave. Unfortunately, we did not succeed in wiping up the competition. Local wonder kid Daud Khadil and Bakhtiyar showed up in the final and reminded us कि और भी लोग debate करने आए हैं, वो भी सब खेलने ही आए हैं. And then I felt loss, and it's been a while, partly because I haven't debated, but also partly because I was quite good when I was debating. And here we got spanked in the final. This is my worst ever placing in a Shajivna final in history. I took a solid fourth there, and I felt quite bad about it. And then I thought, nahi, iska to hame kuch karna padega. So since then, I've just been back. Initially, it was motivated entirely by a desire to beat Khadil and Bakhti. Then we did beat Khadil and Bakhti, and I still felt like I was having a great time speaking. And then at one point I realized this is just a really fun hobby and I like doing it. And I have actually gone against the words which I've uttered on record to all of my friends before and started speaking online tournaments, which I talked a notorious amount of crap about for several years. Here I am. I am booked for the next 5 weekends.
So like basically like as a uni child मतलब all of the things we saw and thought like this is where the line is मतलब ये हम कभी नहीं करेंगे like हम घर पे बैठ के एक online debate tournament कभी नहीं करेंगे is essentially what all of our plans look like for the next month or so. But is debates like basically a large part of debates, at least for me, is like feeling smart. Like you come back, you win tournaments, you're like सबसे smart हूँ circuit में, like मतलब पूरे शहर का जीतता हूँ मैं. And partly like beating the next big competition, like for Masud, Daud and Khadal is also that. Is that also true for you, Imaad? Because you, I don't think like ever really left. And you already experienced like that, you know, potential best in the circuit vibes for a significant amount of time, and yet you're still here. So is it about maintaining that? Like, is it something else? Kya scene hai?
Well, I mean, the way that it started this year, I think it was both a sense of FOMO when I did find out that the two of you were joining, as well as these two gentlemen who I hadn't met before called Ali Nawaz Khan and Sarim Kareem. And I realized I had to find out what they were made of. But second, I think it was also a bit of a lust for glory because I thought to myself, well, Shajivna 1 year with Ashar winning, Shajivna second year winning with Anam. We got to make it a three-peat, as you know, Masud kept on calling it. So we didn't succeed in that either. I think perhaps that's an entire podcast all of its own. But yeah, I think Ashar, you're right when you say that I didn't really strictly leave. I mean, to be honest, after the season of 2023 kind of concluded, I did think that well, that's kind of it for my participation, not just in speaking and but also in judging and everything. But what happened to me after I think having spoken Shajivna and everything, um, I realized that there was a bit of a turning point for me mentally when it came to debating, i.e., now I could detach myself entirely from the outcome, and I had only done that to some degree, perhaps up until that point. To which now the activity itself and purely the sort of intellectual thrill that I get out of it is perhaps the most significant utility that I get out of it, which is why also I've spoken a few online tournaments, busied myself for 4 weeks out of 5, the right before Eid, and hopefully got a few more scheduled as well.
Yeah, so essentially, debate then is partly like an activity of also meeting people, right? Like for me, yes, like winning is important, but as we've realized over like the past 3 months, it's difficult just coming back and winning every tournament. And yet, like I want to go to more tournaments, especially in person ones. And I think like a big factor is socializing, but that always existed, right? Like there were always people at tournaments, barring the COVID years, and sure we can ignore that. But like, is it a factor of just हमारे सारे friends returning and sort of like that's that domino effect pulling people in. Just Imad mentioned me and Masood came back in. But I remember like a lot of, dinos, quote unquote, were there. Hassan Rafiq Bhai's been there. Dr. Heather was there recently. Ali Hanfia's been around. All of these people who've gone through graduation, Bakhtiyar, like they're still coming back. They're still coming to the circuit. They're having fun. Shanavar made that great documentary. So for someone like you, Nawaz, like you came back from the UK, abhi, obviously, like new social life mein वापस आ रहे हो, you've left all of your old friends. Is debate simply a way of like reconnecting with your old friends? Is it like your only socialization hope आजकल? Like what is it? Is it loneliness that's bringing you back? Yeah, like do you have a life beyond debates?
I mean, I think so. I mean, I would be honest, like, the fact that there are people still from my time still debating contributes. Like, if I didn't know anybody from my time in the circuit, I would not be doing this. Um, my comeback, I guess, if you want to call it that, is way different from Taha and Imaad's. Like, I did not come back to Shajivna expecting to stomp everybody. That was not the intention or the outlook going into it. It was more that I was coaching a school here, and you know when you coach and you're like detached from debate. So I hadn't even touched debates for 2 years. But then when you coach, and I wonder if football managers or like coaches actually feel this. It's like you're coaching them, and you're like, what if I was on the field? You know, it was one of those things. Like the itch was just back, and eventually, like everybody in Islamabad, I would be like, no, like this is fine, but judging is kind of boring. I would rather speak. And I found out that Sarim had been in Islamabad for a year. I hit him up, and I was like, well, do you want to speak? And he was very keen to speak. And since then, we have not stopped speaking. So that's kind of the journey. But yeah, like the fact that people that we knew, like the Psycast boys from my time, are all Nawaz, Shanavar, all those people, Bhatti, are still in the circuit. That helps. The fact that Taha Masud has generously decided to come back into the circuit, that helps. The fact that, I mean, even the people who run the ISLO circuit are people that, I mean, they were different people who ran it back in the day, but they're still people I know. So it's one of those things. That's
I like how
definitely the
Nawaz was
pull.
like,
And it's
bro, sorry, yeah. I like how Nawaz was like, bro, nahi, I wasn't here back to when, like, मैं तो सिर्फ here to learn, here to fun boy था. And he's ended up like whooping some insane, like 3 tournaments on the trot, 4 tournaments on the trot. Like, this Fox humbleness is beyond us. क्योंकि नवाज हमारी private chat पे तो message करे जा रहा है कि he's about to destroy Masood at LSD, the appropriately named tournament coming up for LSE this next weekend. So essentially, Masood, how
I
has it felt like seeing your junior come back, whoop you across 3 tournaments?
Yeah, it's not been great. I'll be quite honest with you. Every time I run into Nawaz, I'm reminded of the Nawaz from my A levels, who was, in fairness to him, speaking his first ever tournaments with me, which was very frustrating at the time. It was quite annoying. Um, and he is no longer that Nawaz. So you will no longer find him at 105th on the speaker tab. You will now find him at 5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, even recently. So things have really changed. I do want to quickly comment here, interject on Nawaz's story. Okay, it's not the happy fairy tale romance him and Sarim have been having, because it did not all start out like this. Nawaz's successful team with Sarim is also one of the great, amazing mistakes of Shajivna recent history, because Nawaz first hit me up to ask me to speak Shajivna, but I was booked by you. So Sarim and Nawaz are another one of the great, excellent mistakes to have come out of Shajivna recently.
Masood walks into Shajivna thinking, I am Jose Mourinho.
I am him.
And all of these great things start happening.
I like how Masood like essentially is like the hot babe of the circuit, and Nawaz was like, "Listen, I love you, Masood. Will you go to prom with me?" And Masood was like, "No, fuck you, Nawaz. You're ugly." And then Masood comes up like with another partner, but suddenly Nawaz shows up like lady of the night, all dressed up, matlab suddenly winning everything and all, and now Masood ko regret ho raha hai. It's like Avril Lavigne ka Skater Boy wali music video, if you guys remember, matlab now Nawaz is a skater boy, and Masood,
no,
missing out.
to be man. So to be fair, in that Love Saivi final, I wanted to do a little callback to our first tournament in Lahore together, but then I was like, nobody here remembers that. But that was a final that I lost him. Okay, so that was the first final that I cost him. And that entire final, I won't lie, I had my head down because I knew I lost us the final, But it was the nerves, It was my first final. It was my first tournament in Lahore. I didn't expect to be in a final. But regardless, I was like, I'm going to try to make up for this in this final. But then I didn't say it because then I was like, what if we lose? and the story just repeats itself. So, because like we're opening opposition, Hanfia still has to speak. I'm like, and those CO boys, they've already booked us twice, so anything can happen. I would be more comfortable saying that, like, if I'm like the last speaker and I just know that I won. And like, so I didn't say it, but in hindsight, maybe I should have. Although I did
Many
let him know in private.
you will take many more, you will cost Masood many more finals, starting with LSE next week, if Masood, manages to make it. But like you talked about, like preserving memories and stuff, like this is what this channel like will mostly be about, right? Like making sure like the streets remember, we are the streets essentially. So we will remember like these crazy stories and these crazy discussions and those names that will otherwise, potentially be forgotten. And one of those things that I wanted to, do to kick us off was like have basically like a goat discussion, but we're not starting off with like international goats. Like we'll come to that. Whilst we're on this topic of the local circuit, I want to start off with like your local goat. And essentially, what will that be? Like it could be like the best debater you've ever seen. It could be like just the most dominant person you've seen, like maybe someone who wouldn't stack up to someone else, but like just was the most dominant. What are the performances we're looking at? Like, should we just look at what they've done in Pakistan? Because that is what I'd like to do. But like, if you guys want to expand this and just be like Pakistanis who've debated everywhere, like, you guys can take it that direction. So we'll start off with you, Imad. Like, what do you think? Like, we should set this at who is your local goat?
So, I think we can extend the discussion both ways, and simply to say that if you want to if you want to look at someone who was in the Pakistan circuit, and then later on when they became, let's say, part of the international circuit or whatever, then I think Taha Iqbal, obviously being perhaps at the very top, would, I think, be a no-brainer. I mean, obviously he's facing competition from Ansar and Hamza Tariq, but both of them, all three of them sort of had different journeys, and perhaps I think, as far as I understand it, Taha Iqbal was the only one who spent his university career first as an undergraduate within the Pakistan circuit. But as for someone who's perhaps not gone and become part of an international circuit at all, and I know that this is probably going to be the common basic answer, regardless of whether he's on this particular podcast conversation or not. I I'll have to say that Taha, is the strongest debater that I've met, who's contained within the local circuit. Um, it started off obviously with him being being like the senior within Lums, who's sort of helping me take my first steps in debate. But then it went on to being, even though at this stage even I've become the dino at this point, I can still say that, well, if I have a debate question, if I have something that I need to get a second opinion on, it's likely going to have to come from Taha Masood, because I just think that the debate prowess, the experience, but even more than that, I think just the intuitive understanding of how it is that a
But
particular
it's
debate
funny,
should be
like
addressed, discussed, adapted to.
it's funny you mentioned Masood, because this is, I'm sure, true for like a lot of people of like the generation you and I debated with. But most of us haven't really seen Masood, right? So like, yes, he's made a comeback right now, but he's probably been your goat like throughout your uni years as well. And at least for someone like me, like I barely saw him perform ever in my university years. And when I did see him perform, like because like there were Iqbals and all these other people in the circuit, like I didn't see him wreck and destroy everyone else, but like my images are the same as you've described. So like, how does that work out? Like, is it just the myth of Masood that's for you enough, or like how do you see it? How do you justify this?
It's not the myth for me at all, because I wouldn't buy into a debate myth. But no, it's because when I came into my freshman year, but even years after that, in particular in my freshman year, where there were a couple of instances where I actually went up against Masood, and obviously it didn't come out the winner in those rounds. But when after I was eliminated, and Masood was speaking the out rounds of UET or Shajivna or whatever, and I was in the audience. But even later on, I think, but even outside of, I think, the debate room, when it came to things, let's say oral adjudications, where those oral adjudications of Masood's reflected an understanding of debate that I thought, exceeded the ones that even other stronger debaters had within the circuit, or the reflected, perhaps, like I suggested, a more an ability to not just understand debate but also to help the person in front of him understand the debate as well. Even within his, let's say, camp, taking camp, delivering judgments within those camps. I think all of those strengths were reflected.
Yeah, matlab, I suppose the allegations are true. Masood is our coach. But Nawaz, so like to you now, you obviously saw Masood's rise. So you've seen like origins of Masood before all of us did. So like A, is Masood your goat? But B, even if he's not, like, was it always like this? Like when he came in, even just after like the first few tournaments, was it always a bit like this guy probably special? Yeah, was it like something that happened when you were in the UK, when he entered into
No,
uni?
no, no. So, um, I guess this question kind of does require like a multi-layered answer. So like, firstly, he was always great. Like that's a given. So call back to Shalimar. Like I think we all already knew that he was great, but I think we all also saw when the circuit realized that he's great. So I'll give you the like. I remember the exact debate. It was like us versus Defense Phase One, that same tournament that I lost in the final, and we're being judged by Aisha Ahmed Jr. And I'm new to debates, but I'm pretty sure that at this stage, at the second or third debate that I'm seeing, it's not normal that before the debates end, that the judge just starts clapping after one of the speeches. And she just starts clapping after Taha's speech. And she was like, it was like, I don't know, like, it was like she was moved or something. And like, we find out afterwards that this person has a lot of sway in like Pak team. She's probably going to be in the selection panel, whatever. We already knew that he was going to be a lock for like Pak team. Like the fact that he was on Pak team might have been a surprise for like some people. It wasn't a surprise to us. We already knew. We would have been surprised if he didn't make it, right? Um, but in terms of like people, I, I guess I always thought were good in the circuit, barring him, or great. Like in that year that we started, probably Hasan. In my second year, probably Tabriz, and uh, and then afterwards, I guess like other people locally in the circuit worth mentioning, Iqbal obviously, and internationally probably Ansar and Hamza. It's kind of hard to go against. I guess those are like the standard options.
Yeah, and before like I give it on to Masood, like I want to throw in these names because I want you to do like a comparison, Masood. Because essentially, like Taha Iqbal, for example, probably has one of the most dominant local uni careers like anyone's ever had since potentially Hafiz. I haven't been around for the Hafiz era, so maybe Masood can throw in some stuff there because I've heard no one dominated the circuit like him. But like Iqbal on paper just goes, destroys, wrecks everything. So, is it maybe like Iqbal, for example, like LeBron, that like statistically he's just done everything, and Masood is maybe like may, maybe like MJ, which is like nahi, there's the stats that matter, and there's just the myth of the man. He did it like at a time when no one else did. If he was competing, he would have still taken Iqbal down. So like a bit of that, and also talk to us about Kesser, because like the year you make it to Pak team and have your glorious speech, um, a forgotten thing is that Hassan Kesser destroyed the school circuit that year. Like uske aage piche, like I've barely ever heard of anyone just win tournament after tournament after tournament throughout like a season, like not fall to bad judging or anything like that. So give us like your comparisons, Masood, and like tell us your goat.
Well, Usher, first of all, I'm going to have to remind you that I'm a nerd, so I don't know anything about LeBron or MJ, so that comparison is completely lost on me. Insofar as the more intricate details of these local GOAT discussions go, I just want to quickly note I also think that the actual Pakistani GOAT debaters are Ansar and Hamza Tariq in some combination. I think Taha Iqbal is the clear and obvious third, which is still, legendary, amazing, incredible, whatever. Internationally, he's one small rung behind the other two. In terms of local GOATs, I think that it is hard to establish. I think Taha Iqbal has the single best year in university debating because in his freshman year, he wins the Lums Ivy, he wins Shajivna, he wins LSE, I think he wins Canade, he wins like two or three more tournaments. It's a ridiculous year. Like Taha Iqbal has won every major tournament that year. It's quite funny because that's probably also the weakest he was as a debater. Like he got better every year after that, but he never managed to hit that level of success again, which just goes to show you what a high variance game debating is and how much like the strength of the field and random things matter. So I don't know if I'd say that Taha Iqbal has the strongest overall university career locally, but he definitely has like the best cross section for his freshman year. Like it's a ridiculous domination. Um, I do think that the average best, in terms of like relative to field, most dominant years were Hafiz's. There were a few of those. There were tournaments where he wasn't dropping judges. It was genuinely just incredible domination. Um, the Kesser thing is an interesting one because Kesser didn't speak that much in university. So he was primarily a school speaker. And I think that one of the greatest injustices of Pakistani debating is that his only famous video is the Singapore semifinal, in which I give a much better speech than average, and he gives, unfortunately, a poorer speech than average. So everybody thinks that I'm like, you know, king of the hill, and Kesser is not that great. You are completely right about your analysis of his year in debating. Um, I'm probably fudging the stat a little bit, but I think there were 6 DSP tournaments that year. Hasan won 4 of them, was in the finals of a 5th one, which he lost, and only didn't make it to the final of one of them. This is the exact same tournament Nawaz has been consistently referencing. This is our breakout tournament, mine in particular as well, where we knocked him out in the quarterfinal. That's the only final he didn't make that year. Haha. But yeah, so this stat is one which is drilled into my head because I recall the year after that, Hasan reminded me of this very, very frequently, just because the Singapore semifinal was doing a number for my numbers and not so much for his. Um, I would like to note that I actually don't think I have a contention to GOAT career locally at all, because if we are counting wins, we should probably also count the inverse, which is very bad losses. And I think of your high level local debating talent, I have some of the most incredibly embarrassing losses, because not a year has gone by where I haven't dropped rounds to like very young teams. I'm not even saying bad necessarily, just like chote bachcho se main haarta rehta hu. Which is why, unlike all of these other top dogs, I'm terrified whenever I enter a debate room, because I think this is another opportunity for a bunch of little kids to beat me. Um, just to sum this up, I think if I had a rupee for every time I've lost to 55 main under 17B, I would have 2 rupees, which is not a lot, but it's really painful and embarrassing for somebody of my caliber that it's happened twice.
That's how we lost Shajivna. Like you saw Daud Khadal, you thought कि यार मैं अभी तक किसी स्कूल के बच्चे से हारा नहीं हूँ. You thought कि चलो why stop now?
Had to happen.
But ठीक है. So essentially like Imaad has a goat which is Masud. Nawaz has many goats and Masud says कि goat हो नहीं सकता है कोई. So you all have been useless. So like personality hire जिसके लिए I've been brought in, like we'll steer this conversation into specific names again. So like Nawaz amongst like all of your ये भी हो सकते हैं, ये भी हो सकते हैं. You know, in your mind, you know, एक head to head, you know, match चल रहा है, everyone's iron personing their speeches or whatever. Like who's winning that, you know? And they don't have to win on debate brilliance. Like if by their sheer personality they can make the other person lose, matlab, I count it as greatness.
Okay, so me and Taha have discussed this, and the way we see it playing out is that Answer's probably the GOAT. Answer's probably the GOAT, like in all positions. If you put him OO, OG, CG, CO, he's probably the likeliest to win. But Tariq can probably sneak a couple of rounds if he goes after.
Chalo, so I
That's how
will
we see it.
accept Nawaz ka goat as Ansar with Tariq as like close second. And like local
Yeah.
goat, like, you know, who do you think, just like someone, like if we just discount any speaking that's happened internationally, so we can count Iqbal's Lums's year, but we don't count like his LSE years. So you know, putting that in line, who do you have? Like,
And-
is this Masud
Okay,
your
so
goat?
locally for me, I'll be very honest, the most dominant speaker that I have personally seen is Tabriz. Like when I was speaking and when I understood debate, like that year, Tabriz was just amazing because I didn't interact much with the university circuit. Apart from that, the university circuit was being dominated by Hafiz. So it's those two, probably.
All right. Speak to us like a bit about Tabriz, Masood, because from my memory, after you, the first name that like we hear in Karachi, like so basically a non-Karachi debater who we just hear of because they're that good, was Tabriz. So, and you must have like seen a fair bit of Tabriz's career. So like talk to us a bit about Tabriz first, and then we'll move on to like your goat.
Yeah, so Tabriz was on my shadow team the year that I was on Pak team, so I knew him pretty well. He was decent at the time that he was on my shadow team, but I wouldn't have called him a top level talent. The year right after that, 2016, so this is his circuit and his eventual Pak team, Tabriz levels up and becomes very clearly and obviously the best speaker of his year, at least on the school circuit. So at that point, it's just really obvious that he's very good. I would not call him the GOAT even on the school level because I don't think he won as many tournaments as some other very good speakers have. So I think the skill wise, yes, clearly one of the best school speakers we've produced, but results wise, probably not. Like, so for instance, just a year before him, Hasan has a much stronger record, like in terms of just tournaments won, best speakers, and like top 5 positions bagged and things like that. I think your school GOAT is probably not even Hasan, though, and Hasan will be very unhappy with me for this. I think your school GOAT is still Rafit Tabassum, probably, because Rafit Tabassum was the strongest speaker on, I think, the best schools team we've seen locally, which was LGS Paragon one year, which just, I think in their second U17 season, they won every tournament. And then in one of their U19 seasons, again, they won like every tournament. So I think that if we're going into school level discussions, Rafit Tabassum is the school GOAT. And while Hasan is like probably second, he's not going to beat him. On the university's GOAT level, which I'm assuming I am allowed to now discuss after having answered your preliminary question, my personal university GOAT is Taha. I think he's the best. I think he beat everybody. I think that he had off debates every now and then, which led to strange outcomes. I also, actually, no, my slightly lukewarm take here is I think Taha got screwed over by judging more than a lot of your other top level local speakers. The problem with making a claim like this is that nobody will make it more than Taha Iqbal, which is like a really bad look for anybody. But I genuinely think that his really content dumpy, monotonous style of speaking does not resonate well on the Pakistani circuit, which, bless their soul, although they've improved, has relatively weak judging standards compared to the international one. I think it's indicative of the fact that he was underrated, that when he went abroad, he went from top level Pakistani talent to world champion level talent. I don't think that the Haikbal, obviously he got better, but I don't think the transformations were so incredible that he went from like a completely mid-tier international speaker to like world finalist within a couple of years. So I think he was underrated, and I think he was definitely the local GOAT across enough time.
So Masood ka take is कि Iqbal was underrated and कि like finally Iqbal की सारी crying around to people कि उसके साथ बड़ी judging में ज़्यादतियाँ हुई हैं, like someone's been convinced, मतलब
Yeah. I
good
think
on
we
you.
would all be a lot more sympathetic to the idea that Iqbal was underrated if Iqbal didn't keep saying he was underrated.
I don't even think Iqbal says he's underrated. I just don't think I've ever seen Iqbal accept a match like that he's lost, and also accept like the fact that the judge wasn't like absolutely stupid. I follow the same school of thought. तो like आप या तो मैच जीतते हो या फिर जज को जजिंग नहीं आती है. But it's difficult to get underrated sympathy this way. But ठीक है, this is like a nice little segue into like the next thing I wanted to discuss, because all of the names we take like are essentially lumps, and obviously there's like structural reasons, yada yada yada, why lumps pretend like tends to produce kids with better English, of course. But there is like a big debating culture outside of lumps as well. Because there's a lot of tournaments happening in Lahore. Like har hafte tournament hota hai. Amiruddin's, your Kinnairds, GCUs, all of these like FAS, UET, like countless tournaments happen. And lumps attends, like I would say, like even in our good years, like we attended like 1/10 of all of these, like maybe half of them at like absolute best. But the idea is that there's a lot of other speakers from other universities who more consistently go to these tournaments. So there's probably someone who has like 5 or 6 tournament wins a year outside of lumps who we just don't know of. Now, the thing that I wanted to discuss with you guys is essentially from like these outside of the mainstream wale names, like people who you don't generally see at like Shajivna or at Lamsaibi or whatever. Like what are names that you've just heard of, not from your circles, who used to be very great? Institutes like GCU have long debating history. They could be from the Urdu circuit, they could be from like just like the non-mainstream circuit. But what are just myths names that you've heard from those? So जैसे from the Urdu circuit, like I've heard like Raza Gilani is a name I've heard of, just like destroyed, dominated the circuit for years, matlab Urdu ka. And these are names that usually aren't in GOAT discussion, so I wanted to have like some bring back of them. We'll start with Masud because I think he's had like the longest time in this circuit, so he might have some thoughts. But anyone outside of these circles that you know of, Masud?
यार टू इमीडिएट कैविएट्स I'll make. पहली बात, मैं बर्गर बच्चा हूँ तो मुझे उर्दू सर्किट का इतना ज़्यादा नहीं पता. माई टेक अवे इज ऑल्सो योर टेक अवे, which is के रजा गिलानी भाई was king, GCU was the GOAT Urdu debating institution, and Raza Gilani was probably the best speaker there. From what I have heard, I could be entirely wrong. Take that with a pinch of salt. The second thing where you said outside of your circles, blah, 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 that's just not a thing. Even if there were debaters who went to tournaments I didn't go to and won, these same debaters would show up at other tournaments I went to. So it's not as though there were two debate circuits running in parallel and we didn't have interaction. Like, I know the other great debaters, the ones who are from or not from Lums. So like Ali Hanfia is and was very good. Abrar Ahmed Bhatt doesn't speak now, but was very good. Shah Jahan in recent time is very good. Yeah, like you run into all of these people at the tournaments you're going to as well. There may be a bunch of other tournaments they're attending and you're attending, but in net you do end up running into them. Also, back in the day, Lums I think went to easily 60 to 70% of tournaments. I do want to make a quick note though that I don't think it's a case of like Lums is producing better speakers. I think it's actually quite rare that Lums produced speakers. It's just typically कि बहुत ज़्यादा अच्छे स्कूल बच्चे हमारे like साथ join कर लेते. Like recently, for instance, Daud Khadal, technically a GC speaker, but now he is a LUM speaker and will be representing LUMs because it's a high quality university. सारे parents अपने बच्चों को वहाँ भेजना चाहते हैं. So I think there's actually very few homegrown LUM speakers. A special shout out to our boy Imaad over here, who is also a contender for one of the best local speakers ever, and I think is a genuine case of homegrown speaker. That's one of the few speakers I think LUMs genuinely produced, but on average, I do dispute the claim that LUMs was like churning out speakers. It's not. They were just coming to Lums for other reasons entirely and happened to be good debaters.
Sure. On the same page, like on that front, like usually just good debaters end up coming to Lumps also. But like on this idea, yes, there weren't two parallel circuits, but like let's say you come across some team from another institute who's coming off like 3-4 tournament wins, and obviously you haven't been to those tournaments, you don't know those wins. So essentially, like, have you ever seen someone come across you at a tournament not from your circles, just coming in with huge reputation? And sure, like you might have beaten them once you've debated them, but were there's these non your circle debaters that you interacted with as you grew up, just people from other tournaments ke circuits?
You'd run into people who'd won a tournament and you hadn't seen them before. So like, especially when you're younger on the circuit. So like, I think I first heard about Abrar after he'd won some local tournament. It's like 2016, so I don't remember which one now. It is never happened that somebody's won like 3 or 4 tournaments and you're running into them the first time and you've just not encountered them in your own tournament history, because again, like, it's a fairly unified circuit. You will take turns attending random tournaments in random places. But yeah, for sure, every now and then you run into somebody who you hear has just won a tournament. Most frequently this is Jiki. I think that every now and then somebody shows up and you hear this is a Jiki champion and you're like, oh, okay, interesting, let's see who this is. But typically this stops happening like a couple of years into being on the circuit, because by then you have familiarity with roughly everybody. And then if somebody shows up after winning a tournament, they're the new guy in the room. They're not like some old person who's shown up out of nowhere and you're like, wow, who is this reputable new person?
Okay, but I'm sure like for Nawaz this must have been a thing. So Nawaz, when you were going to the UK, for your studies, like when you left, there were probably a lot of debaters who were either existing, who were just starting out, that you looked at and thought, like, okay, matlab, they're quite shit abhi. But when you've come back, like who's been like the biggest surprise? Like just someone, when you left, they were something else. When you've come back, you're like, wow, like this guy's good now. So who was that for you?
I mean, to be fair, there's not many. The only person I can think of is like, I always thought Prophet Wasam would become good. I never saw him become good, but as Masud has said, he apparently was more than just good. He was apparently great. But yeah, I never got to see that. I guess stuff that was nice to see was probably because like when I was in school, Lums would probably have like 6 teams that were the most competitive. I don't think it's like that anymore. So like even when me and Taha were speaking Lums IV together, I was like, well, I think GC is probably the best university like circuit, right? Like debate team, like collectively. Because I think Jazib's pretty good. I think their B and C teams were also pretty decent. So that's like an interesting surprise to have. I think a better question, and I think the phrasing, and I guess what you're hinting at is, because you're from Karachi and we're from Islamabad, is that very often there would be like, there's a wider circuit in Lahore that's better integrated, and then there are people in Islamabad and Karachi who just continuously attend maybe local tournaments that don't interact with the wider circuit that much. I've seen that, definitely. And I do think there's some kids here like that would probably stand a chance at breaking or be competitive if they integrate with the Lahori circuit. I just think they just don't take the opportunity to go there, get themselves known, get the reps in, develop. And there's probably a misconception as well. I feel like every single time you talk to these people, it's like, oh, there's a bias against us. There's a bias against us. So we will not integrate. Which I'm sure also exists in Karachi as well with your friends, that we won't. हम तो लोरियों के साथ debate करेंगे ही नहीं, क्योंकि उन्हें तो हमें debate देनी ही नहीं है. तो फायदा क्या है? लेकिन हमें पता है हम king है. So this is like the kind of mentality that you kind of have to like get out of, because like otherwise you're just in a bubble. So that's my take on it.
That's like a good segue, because Imaad, like abhi tak obviously completely biased tarike se we've heard Lahori and Islamabadi names, but I think what Nawaz very correctly points out is perhaps these are two circuits, people debating in Karachi who after in their university years become quite good people, like Yilmaz and Hasan historically, and since then many more, and a lot of debaters in Lahore, and you never actually end up running into each other, or very rarely do you end up running into each other. So like, from that insight that you could potentially provide, despite I understand being in lumps, growing up, let's say, who was like your Karachi goat debater? So like some insight onto that.
So unfortunately, I'm going to have to disappoint you only because my debating experience in schools in Karachi in schools was essentially non-existent. I.e., I got up, I washed my face, and I went to a couple of tournaments. No idea of what parliamentary debating is, and therefore I essentially don't count myself as ever having been a debater in Karachi and ever having been a debater in schools. I do remember that at the time there was significant discussion, especially if you were also a participant in the Karachi MUN circuit, that there is a Karachi god and that Karachi god's name is Hamza Jami. The truthfulness of that debate could only obviously be investigated once I reached the Lahore circuit and Lums, and I sort of in my freshman year, Hamza Jami was a senior at Lums, and of course, while Jami was definitely a strong speaker, I did think that he had a reputation in Karachi that I think perhaps operated on a different way that the ways in which reputations in Lahori circuit were perhaps circulating at that time. I mean, my lack of understanding of the national debating circuit as a whole is reflected by this little story that I'll just add on. When I came into my very first Lums debate camp, drums debate camp in my freshman year, I sat in, and behind me there are a bunch of that people who, Zaid was one of them, and all of whom had participated in schools. And Taha Iqbal was standing in front of the classroom, and he said, "So, do all of you know who Taha Masud is?" And then everyone behind me said, "Yeah, yeah, of course, of course." And I'm just looking at Iqbal, and I'm like, "Who is Taha Masud?" So yeah, I unfortunately became, ensconced in the circuit once I stepped into Lahore, and not before that. But yes.
Who is Taha Masud? Wow. I
When
can't
will
believe
somebody ask, how is Taha Masud?
I can't believe bloody who is Taha Masud ended up winning 2 Shajibnas in a row. But ठीक है, folks. That was all for our first episode of On That Point for you guys. Essentially, likes ठोके, comments छोड़े, subscribe करें हमें. I don't think we have a YouTube or Instagram channel up अभी, तो I don't know what you'll be liking, commenting, subscribing. लेकिन like guys, हमें बहुत support करें, हमें पैसे भेजाएं. हम सबसे पहले अपना Patreon सेट करेंगे, and like आपको exclusive content मिलेगा, like सब्सक्राइब शेयर करने पे. असेंशली हम बहुत अच्छी अच्छी बातें करेंगे इस चैनल पे, एंड हम आपको इनसाइड गॉस देंगे कंसिस्टेंटली. एंड अगर आपको इनसाइड गॉस लाइक बाहर में लोगों तक पहुंचानी हो, तो आप हमारे अगेन नॉन एग्जिस्टेंट इंस्टाग्राम पेज पे आप मैसेज करिएगा, आप हमें अंदर की गॉसिप दिएगा, एंड हम आपकी गॉसिप लोगों तक पहुंचाएंगे. दिस इज अशर, इमरान, अली नवाज, ताहा केहान, एंड इमाद साइनिंग ऑफ.